So you've probably heard of something called the scientific method, and I think the scientific method is just kind of the it makes sense sort of method of approaching, trying to understand something. I had a student recently who said in class that science is just, the goal of science is to figure everything out. And so the scientific method tries to go about that systematically. And so there are different kind of nuances to how people explain the scientific method, but they have things in common. For instance, the process would start with observations. And based upon your observations, you come up with a question. Okay, so you see things happen in nature, and you wonder why that is. Well, maybe after gathering more observations and your original question, you come up with kind of a solution or an answer to your question, how things are working. That's your hypotheses. Okay? And sometimes I've heard the word hypotheses as that's your best guess at the time. But you're not done yet. You're not ready to take that hypothesis and share it with the world because you're just uncertain about that whole thing. So the rest of the scientific method is to see if that hypothesis is right or wrong. So one way to kind of get confidence in your best guess is to say, well, if I'm right, if my hypothesis is right, then I can predict that this should happen based upon what I think is the underlying principle of how the thing is working in the first place. So those are your predictions. So with your predictions then, you go ahead and make experiments and test those predictions. Now, if it ends up that you make predictions, you set forth to carry out experimentations or tests to see if those predictions are right, and if you go ahead and your predictions, if what you thought was supposed to happen, your predictions did happen, then you have consistency, and that's a good thing. It gives you, it makes you feel more comfortable that your best guess, your hypothesis was right in the first place. But this little circle right here, you do that like a lot. You do that several times, hundreds of times, because what you don't want to do basically is come out of your research bubble maybe with a hypothesis that somebody else can easily shoot down. So you want to do this many times. But if in all told you don't come up with any predictions and then have tests to test those predictions, if everything's consistent, then it's kind of like if you play checkers and you get to the other side of the board. Once you get to the other side of the board, you've worked really hard and you get to get kinged. So your hypotheses can be elevated or kinged. Your best guess can be kinged to what we call a theory. So a theory has basically survived this sort of scrutiny many times. And scientists, I kind of explain, are sometimes like little kids or siblings, in that scientists sometimes just want to prove each other wrong. It's kind of my observation. And so, there's a lot of that goes on with a hypothesis before it's elevated to a theory. I will warn you, though, that even when a hypothesis is elevated to a theory, there can come along more observations that basically shed doubt on that theory, and that theory can be then, I guess, unkinged. Now, there is another scenario in kind of this looping around, trying to see if your original best guess was right. It's possible that you come up against something that contradicts, like some results or observations that contradict your original hypotheses. In that case, you can maybe adjust your hypotheses and do some more tests, or you can throw your whole hypotheses out and start over again. So that is, generally speaking, the scientific method. So to just kind of wrap things up then, what I want you to know about the scientific method are the terms. I want you to be able to distinguish between hypotheses, best guess. Okay, keep testing. Other people test. And if everything's consistent, your observations, your predictions, and your hypotheses, then you can go ahead and elevate it to a theory. So one of the things that we just got to live with is that these days people say, oh, that's just a theory, and it's like if it's a theory and it came from the scientific method, then there's a lot of effort that's gone on into that. So